At 68 years old, I closed the biggest deal of my life, sold the company. I started from a garage from nothing for $48 million. I wanted to celebrate with my only son Daniel and his wife Marissa. Not with strangers, not with investors or lawyers, but my own son wanted to kill me for that company that $48 million. That company fed families, paid mortgages, put kids through college. I built something that mattered, and the world finally admitted it by putting $48 million in my bank account. At celebration, the restaurant was the kind of place where even silence carried a price tag. Crystal glasses that caught the light like diamonds. Waiters moving so smoothly you barely saw their feet touch the floor. Plates that arrived like paintings, with streaks of sauce worth more than some people's weekly groceries. For me, this was more than dinner. It was a statement that after decades of sacrifice, I had earned a seat in this kind of room. That Daniel could look around and know his father hadn't been a fool for chasing something bigger. He raised his glass. His smile was perfect, too perfect. The kind of smile you practice in the mirror until it becomes second nature. To Isaac, he said, his voice ringing just loud enough to draw glances from the next table. To a man who built an empire from nothing. Marissa leaned closer, her hand sliding onto his, her eyes glowing with admiration that looked almost rehearsed. Anyone watching would have thought we were a family bound by pride and love. Anyone else would have believed this was the happiest night of our lives. But I saw it. When Daniel lowered his glass, just for a second, his mask slipped. His eyes weren't warm. They weren't proud. They were cold, calculating, as if he wasn't celebrating me at all, but measuring me, weighing me like an obstacle. A whisper in my gut told me to be cautious. That smile wasn't for me. It was for himself. I excused myself for a phone call just to breathe, to remind myself that I was imagining things. That suspicion was the tax a man pays when he builds a loan for too long. I walked past walls lined with mirrors and golden sconces, stared at my reflection. An old man in a tailored jacket, finally allowing himself to look like he belonged. When I came back, Daniel was leaning over my place setting. His hand moved quick, too quick for someone who was just adjusting silverware. His body blocked the view, but I caught the faintest motion, a pour, a flick, a tiny gesture. Then he straightened up, smiled wide, and lifted his wine glass like nothing had happened. My heartbeat stuttered. I sat. I tried to ignore it. Plates arrived, lobster tail shining like glass, steak carved with surgical precision, a drizzle of sauce placed like calligraphy. Waiters poured wine older than my marriage. And Daniel kept his eyes on me, his smile never wavering. I forced myself to laugh when Marissa made a joke. I pretended to study the menu, but I saw his glance flick back to my juice, saw the faintest twitch of expectation in his jaw. I lifted the glass, slowly. My hand didn't shake, but my insides were screaming. And then, just as the rim brushed my lip, a low voice cut through the air. "Sir," a man murmured at my shoulder. A security guard. Heavy-set, sharp-eyed, standing just close enough that only I could hear. "Don't drink that." I saw him pour something into it. The words sliced everything apart. The chatter of the dining room went muffled. The chandelier hummed. The fork slipped in Marissa's hand. Daniel froze, only for a blink, then leaned back casually, sipping his wine as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. I lowered the glass. My fingers were steady, but my pulse was a storm. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't paranoia. My only son had tried to poison me, and the quiet warning of a stranger had just turned what should have been the proudest night of my life into the most dangerous. I set the glass down with a steady hand, though inside I felt like the table itself was shaking. The security guard's words echoed in my head, sharp as a blade. I saw him pour something into it. Daniel's eyes flicked to me, quick, searching, like he was waiting for confirmation that I had swallowed. When I didn't, his smile stretched wider, too wide. He clinked his glass lightly against Marissa's, his gaze never leaving mine. My instinct screamed to stand up, to shout, to grab him by the collar and demand answers. But another part of me, the part that had spent decades negotiating with cutthroat suppliers, shady contractors, and greedy partners, told me something else. "Stay quiet. Don't show your hand." I glanced at the guard. He gave me a small nod, then stepped back into the shadows of the room, as if he'd never been there. It was just me, my son, and the poison in the glass. I forced a chuckle, cutting into the lobster on my plate. "You know," I said, my voice calm, too calm, "this tastes like it cost half my mortgage." Marissa laughed politely. Daniel joined in, though the corners of his mouth twitched. He was waiting for me to fall, waiting for my body to betray me. But I wasn't going to give him that. Instead, I raised my fork, ate slowly, and carried the weight of his gaze without blinking. Inside, my mind was moving faster than it had in years. Why? Why would my own son try to kill me? Was the money not enough? Did he think I was going to cut him out? Or had the $48 million already convinced him that the only way forward was without me? I remembered the way his voice sounded when he toasted me earlier. Too polished, almost rehearsed. The way Marissa's hand slid onto his like a stage direction. And suddenly I wondered if this wasn't just Daniel's idea. Maybe it was theirs. Maybe they thought I was too old, too slow, too trusting to ever see it coming. The waiter returned, topping off my water glass, clearing plates. Daniel leaned in, lowering his voice. "You know, Dad," he said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "You've done incredible things with your life, but don't you think it's time to pass the torch? Let someone younger carry the weight." I tilted my head, studying him. He didn't see the guard's whisper still burning in my ear. All he saw was an old man too proud to admit his time was done. "Maybe," I said evenly. "But you'd be surprised how much fight an old man has left." For a fraction of a second, his smile faltered. Just a hairline crack, but enough. I pushed my juice to the edge of the table, signaling the waiter with a flick of my hand. "Can you bring me a fresh one?" I asked, smiling as though nothing were wrong. Daniel's hand clenched around his glass. "Dad, that one's fine." "No," I said, my voice light. "I prefer it cold. This one's warm." The waiter nodded and swept it away. For the briefest instant, I caught Daniel's jaw tighten, his knuckles whitening. He had just lost his first move. And I had just confirmed the truth. Whatever was in that glass, it wasn't juice. Dinner ended with polite laughter, with Marissa complimenting the dessert, with Daniel thanking me for such a generous night. But under the table, I felt the tension in his body, the coiled spring waiting for a chance to snap. Outside, the night air hit cold against my face. The valet brought my car around, and Daniel leaned in to hug me goodbye. His arms were tight, too tight, like he was squeezing a secret between us. "Drive safe, Dad," he whispered, his voice low, almost mocking. I pulled back and looked into his eyes. For the first time in my life, I didn't see my son. I saw a rival, the kind of rival who had already decided the game could only end one way. But what he didn't realize, what he would learn soon enough, was that I didn't build a $48 million company by letting snakes sink their teeth into me. I smiled back, calm, controlled. And in that moment I decided, if my son wanted a war for my life and my legacy, then he was about to get one. The city lights blurred past as I drove home, my hands steady on the wheel, though my chest carried a storm. Every detail of the night replayed in my mind. The guard's whisper, Daniel's forced smile, the way his hand trembled when I sent the poison juice away. I should have been devastated. This was my only son, the boy I'd carried on my shoulders, the young man I'd paid through college, the man I thought would protect my legacy. But all I felt was something colder, sharper. Resolve. When you spend decades building a fortune brick by brick, you learn one thing: never panic. Panic makes you sloppy. Panic blinds you to the angles. So I drove home, poured myself a real drink, and sat in the dark of my study with the leather chair cradling me like an old friend. The house was silent. The city was alive beyond my windows. That's when I made two decisions. First, I would not confront Daniel, not yet. I wanted the truth and I wanted proof. Second, I would use the same tools that had built my empire: strategy, patience, and leverage. The phone on my desk buzzed. An old number lit up the screen. Miguel. He wasn't just a security guard. Miguel had worked protection for me 20 years ago, when I was still climbing, still making enemies. Loyal, sharp-eyed, and discreet. I hadn't seen him in years, but clearly, fate had placed him in that restaurant for a reason. I answered. "You didn't drink it," Miguel's voice rumbled. "No," I said quietly, "and I need to know what was in it." "I can get the glass," he said. "Staff likes me." "They'll talk." "But Isaac, why would your boy do this?" I stared at the whiskey in my hand. "That's the question, isn't it?" Miguel promised to call me back, and when the line went dead, I opened the drawer of my desk. Inside was a small black book, not of names I owed, but names who owed me. Men I'd built with, men I'd saved, men who remembered where they came from. I flipped through it. Slowly, Attorneys, detectives, bankers, quiet men in loud jobs. Daniel thought he could outplay me because I was old. He thought inheritance was simpler than legacy. He thought poison in a glass was the end of the story. He was wrong. The next morning, I put my plan into motion. I called an old friend, Harold, who now sat on the board of a major private bank. He owed me from the 90s when I helped him land his first contract. Harold, I said, do me a favor. Pull Daniel's financials. I want to know what my son's been spending and who's been feeding him the appetite. Harold didn't ask questions. By afternoon, I had the first puzzle piece. Daniel had debts. Heavy debts. Risky investments. Money gone before it was even his. That explained motive. But motive wasn't enough. I needed the truth in my hands. Miguel came through 2 days later. He met me in a quiet diner on the edge of the city, slid into the booth across from me, and placed a sealed bag on the table. Inside the glass. Staff said Daniel kept fidgeting with it before you came back from the restroom. Miguel muttered. I had a friend run a quick test. Cyanide. The word sat between us like a loaded gun. Cyanide. Daniel hadn't wanted to scare me. He hadn't wanted to send a message. He wanted me gone, permanently. I leaned back, the leather of the booth creaking. Thank you, Miguel. You just saved my life twice. He nodded. What now? I looked out the window at the gray morning sky. My reflection stared back. An old man, yes, but not a beaten one. Now, I said slowly, we teach my son what legacy really means. Because Daniel thought he had just made a move on the board. But the truth was, I had just begun the game. The morning after Miguel handed me the proof, I woke before dawn. I'd barely slept, but my mind wasn't tired. It was sharp, clear in a way it hadn't been in years. I brewed a pot of black coffee, sat at the oak table in my kitchen, and unfolded Harold's report again. Numbers, transfers, debts. Daniel wasn't just reckless, he was drowning. Casinos, speculative crypto, private loans from men whose names were whispered in corners of the city. My son hadn't tried to kill me just for money. He tried because he was desperate, because someone was pressing him to deliver. And that told me something critical. Daniel wasn't the mastermind. He was the pawn. I finished my coffee, put on my old wool coat, and drove across town to see Harold in person. He greeted me in his polished office, all glass and steel. You were right, Harold said, sliding another file across the desk. Daniel owes almost $2 million, and most of it to Victor Salerno. I froze. Salerno wasn't just a name. He was a problem. Old-school loan shark, ruthless, controlled a quiet empire in the shadows. I closed the file slowly. So that was it. My son, my blood, had sold me out to the wolves. Thank you, Harold, I said. My voice was calm, but my chest was iron. That'll be all. By the time I left, my plan had taken shape. See, Daniel thought inheritance was his lifeline. He thought killing me would erase his debts. But Salerno didn't just want money. He wanted leverage. If Daniel couldn't pay him, Salerno would use my empire, my contacts, my name. That wasn't going to happen. I called Miguel. I need eyes on my son. Every move, every meeting, discreetly. He didn't hesitate. Consider it done. That night, I set the stage. I invited Daniel to dinner at my house. He arrived late, smug as ever, wearing a suit he couldn't afford. He kissed my cheek like nothing had happened, like he hadn't tried to poison me days before. Dad, he said warmly, you look good. I forced a smile. So do you, son. Sit, let's eat. Over roasted chicken and wine. We talked about nothing, weather, sports, his wife, but every word from him was laced with performance. He didn't know I already had the glass. He didn't know I already knew his debts. He didn't know Miguel was watching from across the street. When dessert came, I leaned back in my chair and studied him. Daniel, I said softly, tell me, what do you really want from me? His fork froze midair. For just a second, I saw the mask slip. Greed flickered in his eyes. Fear, too. He laughed it off. Dad, I just want us to be close. Like family should. But I knew, and he knew I knew. I let the silence hang until it was almost unbearable. Then I smiled. Good, because soon I'll be making some changes. Big ones, and family. Family always comes first. The words landed like a stone in a still pond. His shoulders stiffened. He forced another smile, but I'd already seen the truth. When he left, I walked him to the door. Drive safe, I said. My hand rested on his shoulder for just a moment longer than natural. His eyes darted to mine, uneasy. As his car pulled away, Miguel's voice buzzed in my earpiece. He's not going home. He's heading downtown. Straight to Salerno's club. I stood in the doorway, the cold night air on my face, and let the weight of it settle. My son wasn't just betraying me. He was delivering me. But he didn't know that by stepping into Salerno's world, he was already standing inside my trap. Miguel's voice lingered in my head long after. I'd hung up the phone, downtown, Club Salerno. He's walking right into the lion's den. I stood in the darkness of my study, fingers pressed against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the frost clung to the lawn like silver dust. The world wrapped in silence. Inside, my chest burned with a cocktail of rage, sorrow, and something sharper, resolve. I had known my son was reckless. I had known he gambled with more than money. But I never, not once, allowed myself to believe he would gamble with me. With my life. With everything I had spent decades building from nothing. And yet here we were. Daniel was already too far gone to see me as his father. He saw me as an obstacle, a wall he couldn't climb, so he decided to burn it down instead. And now he thought he had found a match in Victor Salerno. But the one thing predators like Salerno never understood was that old men like me had survived too, many storms to be taken down easily. That night I didn't sleep. My house felt like a museum of ghosts. Every picture frame mocked me. Daniel at age 7, missing a front tooth, grinning with chocolate ice cream smeared across his cheek. Daniel in his baseball uniform, holding a bat 3 sizes too big for him, looking like he could conquer the world. Daniel shaking my hand at his college graduation, pretending he was already a man when he was still just a boy searching for applause. I wanted to smash every frame. Instead, I walked room to room memorizing those smiles. Because I knew the boy in those photos no longer existed. The man walking into Salerno's club was someone else entirely. The next morning, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 20 years. Isaac? The voice on the other end was older now, raspier, but still sharp. Well, I'll be damned. You finally decided to crawl out of retirement? I don't have time for pleasantries, I said. I need someone. Quiet, reliable, eyes where mine can't be. A pause, then a low chuckle. You always did call when the stakes were highest. What's the job? Watching my son, I said flatly, and the man pulling his strings. The chuckle faded into silence. Then, Salerno? Yes. You don't play with snakes unless you're ready to lose blood. I'm ready, I said. Just send me the eyes. The line clicked dead, but I knew the message was delivered. When you spent 40 years building empires, you collected people like bricks, each one strong, reliable, waiting to be placed when needed. I hadn't used that brick in decades. Now I was rebuilding. By evening, Miguel sent me another update. Your boy's inside the club, he whispered. The faint buzz of bass thumped through the call. Looks nervous, talking fast. He's sweating through his suit. I paced my study, every step a drumbeat. And Salerno? He just sat down. Brought muscle. Big guys, armed. I closed my eyes, picturing it. Daniel at the table, clutching a glass, forcing a smile. Salerno sliding into the booth like a shark circling prey. A handshake that felt more like a collar around my son's neck. Salerno's laughing, Miguel continued. Patted your boy on the cheek. Like he owns him. My chest constricted. That wasn't business. That was ownership. The boy I raised was now property of a man who thrived on breaking others. And I couldn't let that stand. The following morning, I summoned Daniel to my office. He arrived late, of course, smelling of expensive cologne. Shoes polished to perfection, tie knotted like he had spent an hour in front of the mirror rehearsing confidence. Dad, he said, flashing a smile too quick, too forced. What's going on? You sounded urgent. I gestured to the chair. Sit. He hesitated, then obeyed. The irritation in his eyes was subtle but visible. He didn't like being ordered around anymore. He thought he was beyond that. I slid a folder across the desk. Inside, carefully arranged, were fabricated financials Harold and I had crafted, dummy accounts, projected asset transfers, balances that looked ripe for the picking. Every page screamed opportunity. Every line was bait. Daniel's eyes widened as he flipped through the papers. His breathing quickened, though he tried to mask it. What is this? His voice cracked slightly. It's time, I said smoothly. I've decided to pass more responsibility on to you, if you're ready. His gaze shot up, disbelief and hunger battling in his expression. You mean all of this? I leaned back, steepling my fingers. All of it. The transfer is scheduled in 3 days. It's large, requires complete discretion. No one outside this family can know. He swallowed hard. His hands trembled just enough to betray him. I can handle it, Dad. You can count on me. The lie sat on his tongue like poison. I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. Good, then prove it. That night, Miguel confirmed what I already knew. Your son ran straight to Salerno. Showed him the documents. They're both grinning like wolves at a butcher's shop. My jaw tightened. And Salerno told him, you did good, kid. We'll make sure the old man steps aside permanently before this transfer clears. My fist clenched until my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm into that club, drag Daniel out by his collar, and shatter Salerno's smug face across the bar. But rage was loud. Rage was predictable. I wasn't going to end this with rage. I was going to end it with silence. The kind of silence that wraps around a predator's throat before he realizes he's already choking. For the next 48 hours, I played my role perfectly. The dutiful father preparing to hand over his empire. The old man finally ready to step aside. Daniel bought every second of it. He strutted around the house, making calls behind closed doors, rehearsing his new identity as the king of my castle. But while he celebrated, I built the trap. I moved assets quietly into untouchable accounts. I encrypted files, rerouted transfers, and left only a trail of numbers that led straight into a pit. I even arranged a meeting with my board, instructing them to play along when Daniel inevitably flaunted his inheritance. By the time he realized what had happened, it would already be too late. The night before the transfer, Daniel came into my study. He looked at me differently now. Not like a son speaking to his father, but like a man looking down on someone he already considered obsolete. Big day tomorrow, he said casually, pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter I kept on the sideboard. You won't regret this, Dad. I'll make you proud. I studied him in silence, memorizing the way his lips curled when he lied, the way his shoulders squared when he thought he had won. You'll have your chance, I said finally. He smirked, lifted his glass in a mock toast, and left the room without waiting for dismissal. The sound of his footsteps fading down the hall was the sound of a stranger. My son was gone. All that remained was an adversary. That night, Miguel called one last time. His voice was tight. They're planning something tomorrow. Salerno told his men to be ready. They think once the money moves, you'll be out of the picture, permanently. I stood at the window again, the city lights flickering in the distance. Let them come, I said quietly. Tomorrow they'll see the difference between taking power and earning it, because I wasn't just defending my fortune anymore. I was defending my legacy, and neither Salerno nor my own son was going to steal that from me. Daniel believes he's ours, away from inheriting everything. Salerno is sharpening his knives, ready to cut Isaac out permanently. But Isaac has already moved his empire into untouchable vaults and left only bait in place. The morning of the transfer dawned like a storm wrapped in silence. The sky was slate gray, the kind that pressed down heavy on your shoulders, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. I just sat in my study, the leather chair creaking under my weight, watching the clock tick toward the hour where my empire, my name, and my legacy would be tested. Today wasn't just business. Today was war. And wars aren't won with guns. They're won with patience, with precision, with traps that close before your enemy realizes the walls are moving. At 10 sharp, Daniel walked into the study. Tailored suit, hair slicked back. The smug smile of a man who believed the crown was already fitted on his head. Ready, Dad? He asked, his tone casual but edged with something sharper, excitement, greed, maybe even cruelty. I stood slowly, adjusting my cuffs. Always. We drove together to the downtown high-rise where the transfer would take place. 30 floors up, a boardroom waited, polished mahogany table, glass walls that overlooked the city like a throne over its kingdom. It was the same room where I had signed deals that changed markets, where my voice once commanded respect without effort. Today it would serve as the stage for a reckoning. When we arrived, Harold was already there, papers neatly arranged. The board members sat quietly, their eyes flicking between me and Daniel. Most of them knew the play. They had their roles rehearsed down to the smallest glance. Daniel strutted in, shaking hands like a politician, his grin plastered too wide. He was intoxicated by the smell of power. He believed every lie I had let him taste. He leaned down, whispering in my ear as he passed my chair. Don't worry, old man. I've got it from here. I didn't flinch, didn't respond, just folded my hands on the table and waited. At precisely 10:15, the glass doors slid open and in walked Victor Salerno. The room chilled instantly. He wasn't a large man, but presence was measured in shadows, not size. And Salerno carried shadows like a cloak. His eyes swept the room with the calm dissection of a butcher scanning livestock. Two of his men followed, thick necks, broad shoulders, eyes that never blinked. They stationed themselves by the door, silent statues of threat. "Isaac," Salerno said smoothly, extending his hand. His voice was silk-laced with venom. "It's been too long." I rose, shook his hand firmly, and smiled. "Victor, always a pleasure." "Isaac," Salerno said smoothly, extending his hand. His voice was silk-laced with venom. "It's been too long." I rose, shook his hand firmly, and smiled. "Victor, always a pleasure." He smirked, sliding into the chair across from me. Daniel immediately sat beside him, like a loyal hound by his master's feet. My stomach twisted at the sight, but outwardly I remained stone. Harold began the presentation. Financial. Documents projected on the sleek digital screen. Charts, numbers, transfers. I watched Daniel lean forward, nodding eagerly as if he understood the complexity of what was being shown. He didn't. He never had. He saw numbers as doors, and he only cared if they opened to wealth. He never asked what was on the other side. Salerno, though, studied carefully. His eyes narrowed, his lips pursed. Predators always smelled when something was too good. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "This all looks impressive, almost too impressive. Tell me, Isaac, why now? Why hand it all over to him?" Daniel jumped in before I could answer. "Because he's tired, Victor. He's old. He knows it's my turn. He trusts me." Salerno's lips curled into a grin. Trust, a dangerous currency. He glanced at me, waiting, testing. I met his gaze without blinking. "Every king eventually names his successor. Today is that day." At 10:30, Harold announced, "We're ready for the authorization." The boardroom grew still. Even the city outside seemed to pause, the traffic muted beneath the thick glass. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he reached for the pen. He was trying to hide it, but I saw. The boy inside him was screaming with glee. He bent down, signed the first line. His signature scratched across the paper like the screech of a nail, dragging across metal. Then the second. Then the third. When the final page was signed, Daniel sat back, exhaled, and turned to Salerno. "It's done." Salerno nodded, pleased. His men relaxed by the door, the tension in their shoulders softening. They thought it was over, but it hadn't even begun. Harold cleared his throat. "With authorization complete, the system will now begin processing the transfer." On the screen, numbers flickered. Accounts scrolled. Bars filled. Daniel leaned back, smug. Salerno tapped the table with 2 fingers, satisfied. And then, the numbers stopped. "Error." Another line appeared. "Error." The screen flashed red. "Account inaccessible." Transfer declined. Daniel's grin froze. He leaned forward, confusion flooding his face. What's going on?" Harold tapped a few keys, feigning concern. "Strange. The system seems locked." Daniel snapped, "Fix it!" But Harold just shook his head slowly. "It can't be fixed. The transfer has already been rerouted." Daniel's eyes shot to me, panic blooming. "What does that mean?" I rose calmly, adjusting my jacket. My voice was steady, deliberate, echoing through the silent room. "It means, son, that while you were busy selling your soul, I was busy protecting mine." The board members shifted. Some smirked. Some stared coldly. Daniel's face flushed crimson. You tricked me." I leaned over the table, eyes locked on his. "No, Daniel. You tricked yourself. You thought legacy was something you could steal, something you could hand to criminals and leeches. But legacy isn't given. It's earned." Salerno's expression darkened. The predator in him realized too late he'd been led into a cage. "Where's the money?" he asked, his tone low, dangerous. I smiled faintly. "Safe, untouchable. Every dollar moved hours ago. What you saw, what you thought you were stealing, was nothing but smoke." Salerno's jaw tightened. He glanced at Daniel, fury flickering in his eyes. "You brought me nothing." Daniel stammered. No, he said, he promised." Salerno stood slowly, the weight of his disappointment pressing down on the room like a vice. "I don't tolerate liars or failures." Daniel's panic spilled over. He turned to me, desperation in his voice. "Dad, please, you can fix this. Just tell him it was a mistake." I stared at him, my heart heavy with grief. "The mistake, Daniel, was thinking I wouldn't see you coming." His eyes filled with something I hadn't seen since he was a child. Fear. Not of me, but of consequence. He reached for me, but I stepped back. "You wanted to be a man," I said coldly. then face what men face when they betray their own blood. Salerno snapped his fingers. His men moved instantly, grabbing Daniel by the arms. "No, wait, Victor, please," Daniel shouted, struggling. "I can get it, I swear." "I can make him give it to us." But Salerno wasn't listening. He leaned close to Daniel, his voice like ice. "You wasted my time. You embarrassed me. And that, boy, is a debt you cannot pay." He turned to me, eyes glinting. "Isaac, this isn't over. Not between us." I met his glare without flinching. "It was over the moment you walked into my world thinking it was yours." For a heartbeat silence, the kind that drips with violence. Then Salerno shoved Daniel toward his men. "Teach him what happens to traitors." Daniel's scream echoed through the glass tower as they dragged him out of the boardroom, his voice dissolving into the chaos of the city below. The room emptied, leaving only me, Harold, and the board. I sank into my chair, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My son was gone, not dead, not yet, but gone in every way that mattered, consumed by greed, swallowed by wolves. And though I had saved my empire, my name, my fortune, I had lost the boy who once grinned at me with ice cream on his cheek. That night I stood at the window again, staring at the city lights. The empire was safe. The trap had worked. Salerno had been humiliated, but victory never felt so hollow. Because what is a legacy? If the one person you built it for chooses to burn it all down, I whispered into the silence to no one but myself. Goodbye, Daniel. The night after the transfer, the city was restless. Because what is a legacy? If the one person you built it for chooses to burn it all down, I whispered into the silence to no one but myself. Goodbye, Daniel. The night after the transfer, the city was restless. You could feel it in the air like static before a storm. Every corner seemed darker, every sound sharper. I sat alone in my study, the silence pressing against my chest. My empire was safe, my fortune secure. But my son, my blood, was in the hands of a wolf. And the truth was unbearable. For 30 years I had worked, sacrificed, fought. I had thought I was building for him. That every dollar earned was another brick in a fortress to protect his future. But what happens when the person you protect invites the enemy inside? The call came just after midnight. A number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was trembling. One of my people. A security guard who owed me more than one favor. "Mr. Isaac, your son. He's at Salerno's warehouse, dockside. It's bad." I didn't ask questions. Didn't wait for details. I just grabbed my coat and left. The dock smelled of salt and rot. The kind of place where the city buried its secrets. Shadows stretched long under broken lamps. And there, tucked between rusted shipping containers, was the warehouse. I slipped inside quietly, my shoes crunching on gravel. And then I heard it. Daniel's voice. Broken, begging. "Victor, please, I can fix this. Just give me time. I'll get you the money. My father will give it to me, I swear." Salerno's reply was cold, almost bored. "Your father doesn't give. He takes. He protects. He fights. You? You're nothing but a boy who thought wearing his name made you powerful." There was a pause and then a dull thud, flesh against flesh. Daniel cried out. I stepped from the shadows. "Enough." The room froze. Salerno turned slowly, that same cruel smile tugging at his lips. "Isaac, I wondered if you'd come." His men stiffened, hands near their jackets. But Salerno raised a hand, stopping them. "No, let him speak." Daniel's head snapped up. His face was swollen, eyes red, but when he saw me, hope flared. "Dad, tell him! Tell him you'll give him the money!" I didn't answer. I just stared at him, and for the first time in my life, I let him see the truth in my eyes. "I already gave you everything," I said softly. "And you sold it." Salerno chuckled. "So poetic. But Isaac, your son is my problem now, unless you want to make him yours again." He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "One word from you and he walks out of here alive. Say nothing and he pays his debt in blood." The warehouse was silent. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. And in that moment I realized something. I couldn't save him. Not because I lacked the power, but because he didn't want saving. He wanted shortcuts. He wanted crowns without thrones. If I pulled him out tonight, tomorrow he'd crawl back to Salerno, or worse, someone darker. He hadn't been poisoned by Salerno. He had been poisoned by his own hunger, and hunger cannot be cured by rescue. I turned to Salerno. My voice was steady. "Do what you must. But understand this, touch my empire again, and I will burn yours to the ground." Salerno's eyes narrowed. For a long, terrible moment I thought he might test me. Then he laughed quietly. "Still the king." He waved his hand. and his men dragged Daniel toward the back of the warehouse. Daniel screamed, thrashing, "Dad, don't leave me, please." "I'm your son." His voice cracked like glass. His eyes locked on mine, desperate, terrified, and I stood there, still, silent, stone, because sometimes the cruelest mercy is none at all. They vanished into the shadows, his screams echoing until the night swallowed them whole. Salerno lingered a moment longer, studying me. "You'll live with that sound forever." I met his gaze. "So will you." And then he left. The city was quiet when I drove home. Too quiet. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, sat by the window and watched the lights flicker. Somewhere out there, Daniel was gone. Whether he lived another hour, another day, it didn't matter. The boy I raised had been gone long before tonight. I thought about legacy, about names carved into buildings, about fortunes locked in vaults, about sons who squander them. And I realized something I wish I had learned sooner. Legacy isn't money. Legacy isn't empire. Legacy is choice. The choices we make when no one is watching. Daniel made his, and I made mine. Dawn crept over the skyline, painting the city in gold. I sipped the last of my whiskey, stood, and whispered into the quiet, "Goodbye, my son." And for the first time in years, I felt free.